Princess Valith Sonkai had stopped believing in miracles 3 cycles ago when her mate disappeared in the fire and chaos of the Battle of the Shroud Nebula, and she had watched the footage of his ship exploding into 1,000,000 pieces of burning metal, and she had screamed until her voice broke and her twin hearts felt like they would never beat properly again. Commander Rinith had been everything to her, and he was gone, and there was no body to bury and no final words to cherish, and she had learned to live with the emptiness inside her chest, like a wound that would never heal. So when her diplomatic cruiser docked at Station Omega-9 on the edge of human-controlled space, she expected nothing more than boring trade negotiations and political smiles and the same hollow routine that had become her life. The station was a massive structure floating in the darkness between stars, and it served as neutral ground, where all species could meet and trade and pretend they did not hate each other, and Valith walked through its crowded corridors with her guards close behind her. She was tall and elegant with silver skin that shimmered under the artificial lights and violet eyes that held the sadness of someone who had lost too much, and her robes were the deep purple of Altherian royalty, and she moved with the grace of someone trained from birth to be watched. The observation deck was her favorite place on any station because she could stand before the massive windows and look out at the stars and remember the nights she and Rinith had spent mapping constellations and making promises they thought they would keep forever. She did not expect to see him standing in the shadows near the far wall. Her body froze before her mind could catch up, and her twin hearts stopped beating for 3 full seconds, and she felt the blood drain from her face as she stared at the impossible sight before her. He wore human clothing, which was wrong because Rinith would never wear such things, and his face was weathered and scarred in ways that Rinith's smooth silver features had never been, and his skin was the pale tone of a human, not the beautiful silver of her people. But those eyes were the same deep color she had loved, and that jawline was the same one she had traced with her fingers on countless nights, and the way he stood with his weight slightly forward like a predator, pretending to be harmless, was exactly how Rinith had always stood. The man noticed her staring, and he did not flinch or look away or show any sign of surprise, and he simply tilted his head in a gesture that could have been greeting or warning, and then he turned and melted back into the crowd like smoke disappearing into air. Valith's guard captain stepped closer and asked if something was wrong, and she realized she had not been breathing, and she forced herself to inhale and shake her head. She told him it was nothing, but her hands were trembling and her hearts were racing, and she knew she had to find that man and look into his eyes and understand how he could wear the face of her dead mate. The man who looked like Rinith had already vanished into the maze of corridors and shops and cantinas that made up the station's lower levels, and Valith knew she should return to her quarters and prepare for tomorrow's negotiations. But she could not make herself walk away. She dismissed her guards and told them she needed time alone, and they protested, because a princess should never wander alone in such a dangerous place. But she outranked them, and her word was law, and they had no choice but to obey. Valith moved through the station like a ghost herself, and she asked questions in the right places and spent credits in the wrong ones, and slowly she gathered pieces of information about the mysterious human who had frozen her heart. His name was Marcus Cole, and he was what humans call a problem solver, which meant he did dangerous work for powerful people who wanted things done quietly, and he had appeared on the galactic scene about 5 years ago, with no history and no past and no connections to anyone. 5 years ago was when Rinith had died. The coincidence burned in Valith's mind like a star going supernova, and she knew it could mean nothing, and she knew it could mean everything, and she had to find out the truth even if it destroyed her. She tracked Marcus Cole to a small cantina on the station's lowest level where the lights were dim and the clientele was dangerous, and no one asked questions about anyone else's business, and she stood in the doorway and watched him sitting alone at a table in the corner. He was drinking something amber-colored, and human, and his eyes were scanning the room with the constant vigilance of someone who expected violence at any moment. And when his gaze found her, he went very still. Valeth walked toward him, and she felt like she was walking toward her own death or her own salvation, and she did not know which one she wanted more, and she sat down across from him without asking permission. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking and more wrong at the same time, and she could see the scars on his face and the hardness in his eyes, and the way his hands rested near weapons she could not see. He asked what she wanted, and his voice was human and rough, and nothing like the melodic tones Rineth had spoken with. But there was something underneath that made her soul ache. She told him he looked like someone she used to know, and he said a lot of people look like a lot of people, and she should find somewhere safer to drink. But Valeth was not leaving, and she leaned forward and studied his face and searched for any sign that he recognized her, and she saw something flicker in his eyes for just a moment before he locked it away. Marcus Cole did not know who he was before 5 years ago, and he did not know why this alien princess was looking at him like he was a dead man walking, and he did not know why his chest hurt when he looked at her silver skin and violet eyes, but he was going to find out. Marcus Cole had built his entire identity on control and discipline and the ability to feel nothing when he needed to feel nothing, and in 5 years of doing the most dangerous work in the galaxy, he had never once lost his composure. But tonight, his hands would not stop shaking, and his mind would not stop racing, and he kept seeing those violet eyes staring at him like they could see straight through to his soul. He had left the cantina shortly after the princess departed, and he had returned to his small quarters on the station's mid-level, and he had locked the door and sat in the darkness and tried to understand what was happening to him. The alien woman had looked at him with recognition and longing and grief and something else that he could not name, and it had stirred something deep inside him that he had not known existed, and he did not like it. Marcus had survived this long by trusting no one and caring for nothing and keeping his past buried where it could not hurt him, and now this stranger had walked into his life and torn open wounds he did not remember receiving. He pulled up his computer terminal and began searching for information about the woman, and the results came quickly because she was not trying to hide who she was. Princess Valeth Sornkai was the 7th in line to the throne of the Altherian sovereignty, and she was a diplomat and a scholar and a warrior in her own right, and she had been bonded to Commander Rineth Sornkai, who had died heroically in the Battle of the Shroud Nebula 5 years ago. The file included images of her late mate, and Marcus stared at them for a very long time. The face looking back at him from the screen was his own face, but it was also completely different, and the man in the images had smooth silver skin and elegant features and eyes that held warmth and kindness instead of the cold emptiness Marcus saw in his own reflection. He told himself it was impossible, and he told himself that coincidences happened, and he told himself that he was being foolish and paranoid, and he almost believed it. But humans had a saying that his handlers had taught him long ago, and it went like this: once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Marcus did not sleep that night, and instead he began digging into files that he should not have been able to access, and using skills that he should not have possessed, and piece by piece he assembled a picture that made his blood run cold. Project Lazarus was the name, and it had been buried so deep in classified archives that most people did not even know it existed, and the few who did know would kill to keep it secret. The project had been a joint venture between Altherian scientists and human military researchers, and its goal had been simple and terrifying: to rebuild soldiers from the genetic level up and turn dying warriors into something new and stronger and completely loyal. The Altherians had pioneered the technology because their people valued the preservation of great warriors above almost everything else, and they had been willing to push the boundaries of science and ethics to save their heroes from death. But the humans had taken that technology and perfected it and twisted it into something the Altherians had never intended, and according to the files that Marcus found, the project had only been used once. The test subject had been recovered from a battlefield, and his body had been broken beyond repair, and his mind had been shattered, and the human scientists had rebuilt him, piece by piece, and given him a new face, and new memories, and a new purpose. They had turned an enemy into a weapon, and they had aimed that weapon at anyone who threatened human interests, and they had been very pleased with the results. Marcus sat in the darkness and felt his world crumbling around him, and he understood now why he had no memories before 5 years ago, and why he could do things that no normal human should be able to do, and why he sometimes dreamed of purple skies and a woman with silver skin, who called him by a name he could not quite remember. He was not Marcus Cole, and he had never been Marcus Cole. And the person he thought he was had been built on lies and blood, and the stolen identity of a dead hero. The anger came slowly at first, like a distant storm on the horizon, and then it crashed over him like a wave, and he wanted to scream and break things and make someone pay for what had been done to him. But Marcus had been trained too well, and he pushed the anger down and locked it away and began to think about what he should do next. He could run and disappear into the vast emptiness of space and try to forget everything he had learned and live out whatever remained of his stolen life in peace and quiet. Or he could find the princess and tell her what he had discovered and see if she could help him understand who he had been. Before the humans had taken everything from him, the choice should have been easy, because trusting strangers was dangerous and caring about the past was pointless, and Marcus Cole survived by looking forward, never backward. But when he closed his eyes, he saw violet eyes looking at him with hope and grief and love, and he felt something stir in his chest. That might have been memory, or might have been something else entirely. He made his decision, and he began preparing for a journey he never thought he would take, and somewhere deep inside him, in a place that the human scientists had not been able to reach or destroy, a voice whispered a name. He had forgotten Valith, his Velshire, the star he navigated by. Valith had not slept, and she had not eaten, and she had spent the entire night pacing her quarters and thinking about the human who wore her mate's face and wondering if she had finally lost her mind to grief. Her advisors had noticed her distraction during the morning's trade negotiations, and they had whispered concerns to each other, and she had ignored them because nothing in the universe mattered, except finding the truth about Marcus Cole. When evening came, she went back to the lower levels of the station, and she found him waiting for her in the same cantina as before, and something in his posture had changed, and he looked at her differently now, with questions in his eyes instead of suspicion. She sat across from him, and her guards remained at the door with their hands on their weapons, and the other patrons of the cantina pretended not to notice the princes and the assassin having a conversation that could change everything. Marcus spoke first, and his voice was rough and tired, and he told her that he had done some research and found some things that did not make sense, and he wanted to know why she had been looking for him. Valith studied his face, and she saw the exhaustion in his eyes and the tension in his shoulders, and she realized that he was afraid, though he would never admit it, and she wondered what he had discovered that had shaken him so badly. She told him that he wore the face of her dead mate, and that Commander Rinnith had been killed 5 years ago in a battle that should have been his final moment, and that she had mourned him every day since then. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and then he said something that made her heart stop beating. He told her that he had no memories from before 5 years ago, and that he had woken up in a human medical facility with a new name and a new face, and skills that he did not remember learning, and dreams that did not belong to him. Valith felt tears forming in her eyes, and she fought them back, because princesses did not cry in public, and because she was not sure yet if this was a miracle or a cruel trick. She asked him what kind of dreams, and he hesitated. Before answering, he told her about purple skies over crystal towers and gardens filled with flowers that sang when the wind touched them, and a woman with silver skin who smiled at him like he was the center of her universe. And he told her that the woman called him a name that sounded like music, but he could never quite hear it clearly. When he woke up, Valeth whispered the name Rineth, and Marcus flinched like she had struck him. And she saw something flash in his eyes that might have been recognition or might have been pain. She reached across the table and took his hands in hers, and his skin was warm and rough and human, but the shape of his fingers was exactly right, and the way he held her hands was exactly how Rineth had always held them. She told him that she believed he was her mate, and that somehow the humans had taken him and changed him and stolen his memories and his identity and turned him into something else. Marcus pulled his hands away, and his face was hard and closed, and he told her that even if it was true, he was not the man she remembered. And he had done terrible things in the past 5 years, and he had blood on his hands that would never wash clean. Valeth asked what kind of terrible things, and he told her about the work he did and the people he had killed and the missions he had completed without asking questions or feeling remorse. She listened without judgment, and when he was finished, she told him that he had been a weapon, and weapons did not choose their targets, and the guilt belonged to those who had aimed him, not to him. He looked at her with something like hope and something like fear, and he asked why she was not disgusted by what he had become. She told him that she had loved Rineth with her entire being, and she would love whatever remained of him, no matter how much he had changed, and she asked him to come with her and let her show him who he used to be. It was not a request, and they both knew it. Marcus thought about everything he had learned and everything he had lost and everything he might still be able to find, and he made a decision that went against every instinct the humans had programmed into him. He said yes, and the word felt like breaking chains. They left the station together that night, and her guards did not know what to think of the human assassin traveling with their princess, and the politicians were scandalized, and the rumors spread like fire through dry grass. But Valeth did not care about any of it, because for the first time in 3 years, she felt something other than grief and emptiness, and she held on to that feeling like a lifeline. The journey to the Altherian homeworld would take 6 days, and in that time, she would show him everything she had and tell him every story she remembered and pray to every god. She knew that somewhere inside this human shell, her mate was still alive. And Marcus sat in his quarters on the Altherian ship and looked at his human hands and wondered who he really was and whether he had the courage to find out. The answer was waiting for him among the purple skies and crystal towers of a world he did not remember, and he was terrified. The Altherian homeworld was more beautiful than anything Marcus had ever seen, and the moment the ship broke through the atmosphere, he felt something shift inside his chest, like a lock clicking open. The sky was purple, just like in his dreams, and the crystal towers of the capital city caught the light of the twin suns and scattered rainbows across the landscape and gardens stretched between the buildings filled with flowers that really did sing when the wind touched them. Valeth watched his face as he stared out the window, and she saw the wonder in his eyes, and she dared to hope that somewhere beneath the human mask her mate was waking up. She had prepared quarters for him in the royal palace, and she had gathered everything she could find that had belonged to Rineth, and she spent the first 3 days showing him holovids and recordings and physical objects that might spark his memories. They watched recordings of their bonding ceremony together, and Marcus saw himself with silver skin and elegant robes pledging eternal devotion to the woman beside him, and the words came from his mouth, but he did not remember speaking them. They listened to messages Rineth had sent from the front lines, and Marcus heard his own voice speaking with warmth and poetry and love and calling Valeth his Velshaya, which she explained meant something like the star I navigate by. They looked at weapons he had carried and clothes he had worn and gifts he had given and received, and each object felt familiar in a way that Marcus could not explain, but none of them unlocked the door to his lost memories. On the 4th day, Valeth took him to the military archives and showed him classified files about Project Lazarus, and together they pieced together the full horror of what had been done to him. The Battle of the Shroud. Nebula had been a trap, and Rineth's ship had been targeted, specifically because the humans had wanted to capture him alive, and they had succeeded. Though the Eltherians never knew it, human forces had recovered his dying body from the wreckage and brought him to a secret facility, and the scientists there had spent months rebuilding him from the inside out. They had replaced his silver skin with human flesh and reshaped his elegant features into something ordinary and unremarkable, and they had implanted false memories of a human childhood and human training and a human identity named Marcus Cole. But more than that, they had programmed him and conditioned him and turned all of his warrior skills towards serving human interests, and for 5 years, he had been their perfect weapon, killing whoever they pointed him at without question or hesitation. The files contained a list of his missions, and Marcus read through them with growing horror, and he saw the names of diplomats and scientists and military leaders from a dozen different species, and he realized that he had shaped the fate of the galaxy without even knowing what he was doing. He had assassinated an Altherian ambassador whose death had prevented a peace treaty, and he had killed a Valorian scientist who had been close to discovering a cure for a plague that was devastating her people, and he had eliminated threats to human expansion across 3 different sectors. Every death had served human interests, and every death had been his fault. Marcus felt sick and angry and lost, and he wanted to tear himself apart for the things he had done, and he told Valeth that he was a monster, and she deserved better than the broken weapon he had become. But she took his face in her hands and made him look at her, and she told him that he was not the monster, because the monsters were the ones who had created him and aimed him and used him. She told him that weapons did not choose their targets and soldiers did not choose their wars, and the guilt for his actions belonged to those who had stolen his memories and his identity and his free will. She told him that Rineth was still inside him somewhere because she could see it in the way he looked at her, and the way he moved, and the way his voice softened when he spoke to her, even though he did not realize he was doing it. And she told him that she did not need him to be who he was before, because she had fallen in love with his soul, not his face, and his soul was still the same even if everything else had changed. Marcus felt tears on his face, and he did not know if they came from his human eyes or from somewhere deeper, and he pulled Valeth into his arms and held her like she was the only real thing in a universe of lies. He did not remember loving her, but he knew that he did. They stayed like that for a long time, and when they finally separated, Marcus had made a decision. He told Valeth that he could not change the past, and he could not bring back the people he had killed, but he could make sure that the humans who had done this to him would never do it to anyone. Else he was going to expose Project Lazarus and burn it to the ground and make everyone responsible pay for what they had done. And Valeth smiled at him with fierce pride, because that was exactly what Rineth would have said. The humans had turned her made into a weapon. They were about to find out what happened when that weapon turned against them. The assassins came on the 6th night when the twin moons hung low over the crystal towers, and the palace was quiet and dark, and Marcus was not surprised because he had known they would come eventually. He had been the best operative Project Lazarus had ever produced, and now he had gone off script and learned things he was never supposed to know, and the humans who had created him could not allow him to exist any longer. There were 12 of them, and they were the best soldiers humanity had to offer, and they moved through the palace like shadows with weapons drawn and murder in their hearts. Marcus was waiting for them. He felt them coming before he saw them, because his senses were sharper than any human should be, and he understood. Now that the Altherian biology they had tried to erase had not been fully destroyed, and it had been growing stronger ever since he arrived on this world. The first assassin came through the window, and Marcus caught him by the throat and threw him across the room without killing him, and the second and third came through the door and he disarmed them with strikes that were too fast for human eyes to follow. He moved through them like water flowing around stones, and he used every skill they had taught him, but he did not kill, and he did not maim, and he left each of them alive to deliver a message. The squad leader was the last one standing, and Marcus held him against the wall with one hand and looked into his terrified eyes and spoke in a voice that carried harmonics no human throat should have been able to produce. He told the soldier to go back to his masters and tell them that Rineth Sarnkai remembered and that he was very disappointed in what humanity had become. The soldier's eyes went wide with fear, and Marcus knew it was not because of the threat, but because of what he had just revealed about himself. The humans had tried to destroy an Altherian warrior and turn him into a human weapon, but instead they had created something new and something more, and their own engineering had combined with Altherian biology to produce a being that was stronger and faster and more dangerous than either species alone. Marcus dropped the soldier and told him to run, and the man scrambled away through the broken window and disappeared into the night. Valeth appeared in the doorway with her own weapon drawn, and she looked at the groaning assassins scattered across the floor, and she looked at Marcus standing among them without a scratch, and she felt her twin hearts swell with pride and love. She asked if he was all right, and he said that he was, and then he crossed the room and took her hands in his and looked into her violet eyes. He told her that he did not know if he could ever be who he was before, because too much had changed and too much had been lost, and the man she had loved was buried somewhere inside him but might never fully emerge. She told him that she did not need him to be who he was before, and she needed him to be who he chose to become. Marcus considered that, and he thought about 5 years of being humanity's weapon and a lifetime before that of being an Altherian warrior, and now something else entirely that was neither and both. He told her that the galaxy thought humans were young and naive and easily manipulated, but they did not understand what humans really were. She asked what that meant. He said that humans were adaptable and relentless and very, very good at surviving, and they had taken the worst tragedy of his life and turned it into something that made him stronger and faster and harder to kill than ever before. And now he was going to use that strength against them. He took her hand and told her that he wanted to show the galaxy what happened when humanity's best weapon decided to fight for something other than human interests, and he wanted to show them what happened when a human, even a maid, one chose love over programming. Velith's twin hearts sang with joy, and she kissed him, and the kiss felt like coming home after a long journey through darkness. The revelation of Project Lazarus shook the galactic community when it came out, and there was anger and calls for war and demands for justice, but there was also something unexpected within human space. There was a reckoning, and people who had believed in better things rose up and demanded accountability, and the leaders who had authorized Project Lazarus found themselves facing trials and imprisonment and the end of their power. Marcus became something unprecedented in galactic history, and he was a bridge between species and a symbol of what was possible when people chose to be better than their worst impulses. He testified before the Galactic Council with Valith beside him, and he told them what had been done to him and what he had done while under human control, and he did not ask for forgiveness because some things could not be forgiven, but he asked for a chance to make amends and to use what he had become for good instead of evil, and to prove that even the darkest actions could be the beginning of redemption. Valith spoke after him, and she told the assembled representatives that humanity was young and made mistakes and terrible ones, but they also learned and grew and chose to be better. She told them that when humans loved, they loved with everything they were, and she looked at Marcus as she said it, and the whole galaxy could see the truth in her eyes. The council did not know what to do with them, and there was no precedent for this situation, and they did the only thing they could, and they let Marcus and Valith go, and trusted them to find their own path. They returned to the Altherian homeworld, and Marcus learned to answer to both names because he was both people now and always would be. And sometimes at night, when the twin moons rose over the crystal towers, he would remember fragments of his old life and share them with Valeth, and she would fill in the gaps, and together they would rebuild what had been lost. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, and it had underestimated the power of love and choice and the stubborn refusal to give up even. When everything seemed lost, it would not make that mistake again. And Marcus Cole, who was also Rinith, Sorn Kai stood with his mate under the purple sky and felt whole for the first time in his strange and broken and beautiful life.